Yeah, it's 11:02, Marina, and that's when I usually start. So go for it.
Okay, thank you, thank you, Len. Well, it is my pleasure and honor to introduce our guest speakers today. We are honored to have Dale Porter and Kate Chalfin joining us. Dale Porter is a research biologist in the Pathology and Physiology Research Branch in the Health Effects Laboratory Division of the National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health in Morgantown, West Virginia. He is also an adjunct professor in the Department of Physiology and Pharmacology at West Virginia University. Dr. Porter received a Bachelor of Science degree in biology from Allegheny College and master degree in agricultural biochemistry and Ph.D. in genetics and developmental biology, both from West Virginia University. His expertise is in pulmonary toxicology. His research focuses on pulmonary toxicology and occupational lung disease associated with exposure to occupationally relevant particles. He is an associate editor for the journals Nano Impact and Inhalation Toxicology and a member of the National Society of Toxicology, OECD Nanosafety Team, and ASTM International E56 Committee on Nanotechnology. Our second guest speaker is Kate Chalfin. She is a director of technical committee operations at the ASTM International. This is a globally recognized organization, and Kate is globally recognized leader in the development of voluntarily consensus standards based in Pennsylvania. She has 14 years of experience in standards development and has been with ASTM for 16 years. Kate manages Committee E56 on nanotechnology. As part of her role, she acts as a liaison between technical committee members and various government entities, trade associations, and other standard development organizations. And she works to improve services to the society members. So she actually manages very complex portfolio and of standards and documents and ballots, and manages communication between different parties involved in standards development. So without further ado, Dale and Kate, welcome to the FNL High Fidelity Seminars. Thank you for joining us, and the microphone is yours.
Thank you so much. I'll go ahead and share my screen. Oh, can everyone see the presentation?
I see your screen, but I don't see the presentation.
Still, do you see the title page yet? No? Okay, let me try a different way. Doesn't seem to like that.
I think we might be seeing your other monitor.
Oh, yes. Thank you. You know what? Just bring it right over there for you.
Okay, now we see the PowerPoint.
Okay, thank you. So today we'll be talking about ASTM International and also specifically Committee E56 on nanotechnology. Within ASTM International, we have over 12,700 ASTM standards that are published and available globally. And they apply from everything to from steel to sustainability to amusement rides and everything in between. And ASTM standards, part of our mission is to improve the lives of millions each day. So this is just an example of some of the ASTM committees. A1 on steel, stainless steel, and related alloys was the very first ASTM committee, and will be 125 years old next year. We also have E50 on environmental assessment that manages the standard on phase 1 site assessment. That was another committee I managed earlier in my career. Everything from D20 on plastics, E60 on sustainability, which covers a broad area of efforts. F4 on medical and surgical materials and devices is the other committee I currently manage. And like I said, F24 on amusement rides and devices. So if you're going to a amusement park this summer with your children and you're waiting in line, you'll likely see references to ASTM standards while you're waiting to get on that ride. 7,400 ASTM standards have been adopted, used as a reference, or used as a national basis, a basis of national standards outside the United States. We have a MOU program that helps us to document those references. Why standards? I'm sure many of you actively participate in standards and are well aware, but standards generate an impact. They provide access to markets, cost savings, more reliable ordering and purchasing. They help to minimize risk and meet regulatory objectives. So E56 specifically has a lot of participation from the FDA, who comes to us looking for, having standards needs around nanotechnology that would help to meet regulatory objectives in their area. So what is a standard? A standard is a very broad term. It has a specific connotation within ASTM. So as used in ASTM, a standard is a document that was developed and established within the consensus principles of the organization. And that meets the requirements of the ASTM procedures and regulations. So the regulations within ASTM are essentially the rules, the requirements and rules for the consensus process. And so that's part of my job, is to make sure that the committees that are developing the standards are meeting those requirements. And then full consensus standards are developed with participation of all parties who have a stake in the standards development and or use. So underneath that umbrella of the term standards, ASTM actually has 6 different types of standards. So specifications and test methods are fairly straightforward. A practice is a set of instructions that does not produce a test result. So essentially very similar to a test method, but a little bit different. A guide is essentially a collection of information. Our guides look very different from committee to committee and can have all different types of information. But essentially a guide is what you would use to collect information and share it. Then we also have classifications, and terminology, of course, is just a list of terms and their related definitions. Almost all of our committees, when they start, and they're fresh committees, start with the terminology dictionary, of course, because you want to make sure that everyone's speaking the same language before you start developing standards. Who are the ASTM members? We have a wide range of members, types of members. We have scientists, engineers, business leaders. We have members from academia. We have some students who participate in the process. Consumers, we have a specific committee on consumer products, and we have a lot of consumers that participate in that process and lend their voice there. And we have over 145 technical committees across ASTM. So the technical committee is the main committee level. So E56 is one of those 145 plus committees. And within those, there's subcommittees that have more specialized scopes underneath that umbrella of the main committee scope. Across our membership, we have over 135 countries represented through the ASTM membership. This is just a screenshot of a visual of how the committees are organized. So E56 is our main committee, which houses all of the E56 standards. Underneath E56 are several subcommittees that have a more specialized scope as it relates to nanotechnology. And there's a subcommittee chair that leads each of those subcommittees that's responsible for the maintenance of those standards and bringing in any new development of new standards. And then within the subcommittees, there are also task groups. They're not always defined or listed in ASTM, and they might change, depending on what the subcommittee is working on. But those task groups would lend their expertise to writing specific standards or revising specific standards. And within the task groups, You don't have to be an ASTM member to participate in the task group. So if we have interested parties that would like to participate in the process or lend their expertise or review a document, that's all available at the task group level for any individual. The balloting and review process. So any new ASTM standard and any revision to an existing ASTM standard goes through a balloting process at the subcommittee and the main committee level. And it needs to pass those two levels before it can move on to approval and publication. All objections received during the approval process must be addressed. So essentially, if one negative is received from any member of the committee or even the society, that stops the process. The committee has to address that negative as outlined in the regulations before the item can move forward to approval. If there's any technical changes that are identified in the negative or comments or in the process, then those technical changes, if they're made to the draft, would then result in a new ballot, a reballot of the item on the next committee ballot. ASTM also has a requirement that the existing ASTM standards need to be reviewed every 5 years and then balloted either for reapproval, which means there's no changes to the existing document. The committee's reviewed it and found that it's still current and accurate. It could be balloted for revision if they've identified some technical changes that need to be made, or in some cases, the committee may review the standard and realize that it's no longer necessary, it's not relevant, it's been replaced by new technology, and in which case they could ballot that standard for withdrawal. I'm going to talk a little bit about our Interlaboratory study program. We refer to them as the ILS program. And so within that umbrella of standards, when we talk specifically about test methods, ASTM test methods are slightly different than some other STOs in that within our guidelines and guidance, we have a requirement that our test methods need to have a precision and bias statement with repeatability and reproducibility. And so there's often cases, as I'm sure you're sitting here thinking about that requirement, that it may not be possible. And so we do have exceptions and clauses where the committee can include documentation or language in the standard to explain why that's not possible. Maybe there's only one lab in the world that can do this program or has the equipment, in which case we couldn't have reproducibility across labs. Maybe it's simply too challenging to get a reference material to perform the tests at a level a number of times necessary for an ILS. But when an ILS study is possible, an interlaboratory study is possible, the ILS department is meant to support that process in any way that they can. So essentially, they facilitate the production of data and they develop the precision and bias statement based on the data received from the lab. So they provide administrative support to the committees, meaning all the labs would perform the test, submit a data form or data report to ASTM. They collect that information, run the statistics on it, and provide the precision and bias statement, as well as a research report, supporting research report, that then would be kept on file at ASTM. There are scenarios where they can offer financial support to the committee, maybe shipping the samples from one lab to another or to the different labs. We can provide support for that. And also, of course, to help to ensure the confidentiality of the participating labs. This is another slide of just some of the examples that our ILS team can do. They may review the experimental design in advance of the study to give feedback on, from their experience, how it could be improved. They can help to identify volunteer labs, sample vendors, sample distribution, as I mentioned, and data collection and analysis of the data. And then they use statistical processing using ASTM standard E691, which is the standard referenced within our guidelines on developing an ILS program. Are there any questions on the ILS program, or Dale, did you want to add anything around ILS?
Yeah, I just wanted to comment on the ILS because as a biology laboratory, if you've ever participated in ILS, they can be very difficult and cumbersome and very difficult to coordinate. The advantage with ASTM is a lot of, if not most, if not all, the administrative burden is on ASTM. So they would be the central location where samples would be distributed to the participating laboratories. That doesn't fall on, for example, me or you. That would be done by the administrative support group. And as Kate pointed out, there are sometimes cases where an ILS is required, but simply isn't possible. For example, if a standard involves using a human blood sample to do a proper ILS, we should all be using the same blood sample. But that's simply not possible if I'm located in Morgantown and another lab's located, say, in Arizona. There's no way that's going to be possible. So we can explain that, and then we can substitute intra-laboratory bias and precision for an interlaboratory study when interlaboratory studies simply aren't feasible. And that's important, particularly in people and the standards that go through my subcommittee, which is 03, because we're largely dealing with biological endpoints, and sometimes an ILS just isn't possible.
Thank you, Dale. The next slide is on technical committee operations. So essentially that is the division that I work in. Outside of being a director at ASTM, I'm also considered a staff manager, and each committee, E56, A1, each one of our committees has a staff manager assigned to them. And the role of the staff manager is essentially to support the technical committees in a number of different ways. We support in editorial efforts, so we have a staff editor also assigned to each committee who can review the draft before it's put on ballot for editorial review, and also is required to review and edit the document once it's been approved. And so the editor will work on it once the draft's been approved and put it into the final version of the published standard and send it to the technical contact for review. In support of the editorial side, we also have draft templates for new standards on the website. So you can download a Word document that has all the required sections listed out for a specific type of standard, a test method, a specification, and then essentially just follow that format to develop the standard. We also offer support electronically. We can set up WebEx meetings for task groups that are working on standards. We have many task groups that have weekly or bi-weekly reoccurring WebEx meetings to continue to move forward on working on their drafts. We also have electronic balloting. So all of the balloting that's done at the subcommittee level and the main committee level is done online. All the ballots are open for a 30-day window where you can just log into the website and submit your comments. And then finally, we have a corporate communication department. So E56, some members will utilize this when a standard is published and they would like to send out a press release. We have a team that can essentially interview the technical contacts, since we're not the technical experts, but they can review them and then put together a press release to be sent out when the standard's published. So now I'll just do a deeper dive into Committee E56 specifically on nanotechnology and give you some information about our committee. E56 was organized in 2005. Currently, we have over 160 members from about 17 countries. E56 on a typical meeting schedule will meet twice a year, face-to-face, and we generally have about 20 to 25 members in attendance. Of course, things have shifted a little bit lately. E56 has been meeting twice a year virtually instead of in person, but I think we'll look to start up again face-to-face in the fall. Even when E56 does meet face-to-face, they always have WebEx availability. So essentially we're having hybrid meetings where anyone can call in and join the meeting virtually. There's 6 technical subcommittees within E56 that I'll get to in a minute. And we have 29 active standards and 14 draft proposed new standards. So those are work items that a member has registered with the intent to develop a new ASTM standard under E56. This is the scope of Committee E56. There's a lot of words here, but essentially the scope of E56 is extremely straightforward. It is the development of standards and guidance for nanotechnology and nanomaterials. And the group kept it as basic as that. But there's other language in here that essentially is in all of the ASTM committee scopes that will coordinate the needs of standards with existing ASTM standards. There's very little overlap for Committee E56 among the other ASTM main committees. So that's not a big focus for E56. But also we coordinate the work with other SDOs. So we want to be sure that we have a liaison with other SDOs to minimize duplication of effort and to ensure we're fulfilling the standards needs of the industry and the community. This is a visual representation of the organization of Committee E56. So at the main committee level, we have 4 officers. We have a chair, Debbie Kaiser from NIST. The vice chair is Alex Stefaniak from NIOSH. A membership secretary who helps to manage the roster and make sure the roster is balanced for our consensus requirements. That's Tony Thornton of Micromeritics. Our secretary is Shan Zhu from the National Research Council of Canada. And then, of course, I'm the staff manager for E56. The technical subcommittees are listed here, so you can see essentially how the sub-scopes within E56 are broken down. Dale Porter, who's with me here today, is the chair for subcommittee E5603 on environment, health, and safety. We also have, I'll just point out because I'll talk about this in a minute, we have a subcommittee E5607 on education workforce development. And our newest subcommittee is E5608 on nano-enabled medical products. Outside of the technical subcommittees, which are the subcommittees that are developing and maintaining technical standards, we have 2 administrative subcommittees. The executive subcommittee essentially oversees the work of all of E56 and makes administrative decisions on, for example, what the committee fund should be spent on if the committee has funds. They talk about long-range planning, so what direction they'd like to see the committee go in, membership promotion and member retention, how we can draw in new members and interested parties, and educate people on the work of E56. So all of those discussions happen at the executive subcommittee level. If there's a proposal for a new subcommittee, that would go to the executive subcommittee as well. E5605, as I noted in the scope, part of the focus is to have a liaison with other SDOs, trade associations, organizations that are interested in or working on standards around nanotechnology. So we have a subcommittee specifically geared towards that on liaison and international cooperation that's responsible for reporting back at our meetings with some of those reports. This is just a screenshot of the E56 homepage, which is found on the public website, and a link to take you there. I think the most helpful item on this page is essentially a link that says a list of subcommittees and standards. And if you click on that link, it'll show you the 6 subcommittees I just noted. And that will show you within each of those subcommittees which published ASTM standards are available or that subcommittee has jurisdiction over. This is a list of key standards within Committee E56. I won't go into detail on these. I'll, if Dale has anything he'd like to say about these as my technical expert, I'm happy for him to jump in. I'll just note that you can see at the very top, I said terminology is one of the first standards that a new committee will develop, and that's no different for E56. So that standard terminology document has been in place since early years of the committee being here, and is constantly reassessed and to determine if there's new terms that should be defined or if there's an update to our existing terminology.
Yeah, I'd just add that Kate and I picked these standards out as representing sort of the the breadth of what E56 covers. If you look at those, you'll see that we have standards for how to handle nanoparticles. There are standards there that are to evaluate the toxicity of nanoparticles. And then the last one, which I think we'll talk a little bit more later, is a guide related to workforce education, which was pretty unique. And during its development of that standard in the committee, the amount of details that the people writing that standard had to get into outside their area of expertise was quite unexpected, I think, and very interesting. But I think we'll probably talk about that a little bit more later.
And then here I just highlighted two specific E56 standards. Again, I think this will speak a little bit to the different types of standards across E56 that are being worked on. I'll speak to E2996, the Standard Guide for Workforce Education in Nanotechnology, Health and Safety. This is just one standard of a suite of standards. I think they have about 6 or 7 at this point, where essentially the standard outlines a set of foundational educational requirements for nanotechnology, the nanotechnology workforce. And so there's a small task group of new members that came and presented this to E56 and were approved to move forward. They have their own subcommittee now on education. They have this suite of standards, and they've even started a certificate program with ASTM where they essentially work together with a team that they've selected to write exams for the certificate program. So for example, if an undergraduate class takes a nanotechnology class in, for example, health and safety, then they could take this exam, which is developed by ASTM and this task group. And if they pass the exam, they would get a certificate noting that they meet this set of foundational knowledge on nanotechnology and can take it with them into the workforce when they're applying for different positions. They also set it up so someone who's currently working in the workforce and feels that they have knowledge, the required knowledge level on this, can just take the exam. They don't need to take the class and get a certificate, to say that they meet this level and use it for, to promote themselves within the industry. So this was a very interesting, I don't think there's any other ASTM committees that I'm aware of that have taken on a project like this. And it's been really positive and well received in the industry and in the education in the universities across the US. And then Dale, I'll let you speak to E3247.
Sure. But before I do that, on the workforce guide, I just would point out that beyond the science, these people that wrote this standard also had to bring in experts from the education in terms of test writing and randomization of test questions, because students can take the test more than once. So they didn't want the same data set to be used for every test. So it was really interesting to see that process behind the scenes. What these scientists had to go outside their normal area of expertise to develop this standard. But as far as 3247, yeah, I picked this one out to highlight because I think this is a standard that covers a wide breadth of applications. A laboratory such as my own, we often suspend nanoparticles in liquid media before we do exposures, either in vivo or in vitro. And in order to keep our experiments reproducible, we have to know what the size of those materials that we're exposing are. And we do that by dynamic light scattering. Of course, that's hydrodynamic diameter, that's not physical diameter, but it allows us to keep consistency between experiments. But this same standard can be used in pharmaceutical industry to monitor their materials. Chemical production industry could use this standard. So it spans the realm of a basic laboratory like mine studying disease mechanisms to a pharmaceutical company or chemical company producing a product. But we can all use the same standard, and it's written in a way that those different groups can use this particular standard.
Thank you, Dale. And then the last slide here on the work of E56, I'll look to Dale again, but these are just work items we pulled that are the current focus of the committee. So just to refresh, the work item is what's registered when an individual is looking to develop a new or propose a new ASTM standard. Members will also register work items when they're working on a revision to an existing standard, and it's just a way to track the work of a task group or the work of an individual that's making changes or proposing a new ASTM standard. So it's a tracking device that we use. They're available for view on both the public website as well as the members area of the website. So anyone either in the committee or on the public side can track this process. And the public work item page, in fact, will say at what stage the work item is, whether it's still in draft, meaning the task group's still meeting and working on the draft itself. If it's in balloting, it means it's currently on a ballot and being reviewed by the committee. It'll also show if it's been balloted and has negatives pending that the committee's working on, or when it's been approved and is pending publication. So all of that can be followed. We use these work items to track all of that information from the very start all the way through approval and publication. So Dale, I didn't know if you wanted to speak to the technical aspects of some of these proposed work items.
Yeah, again, we selected these ones that kind of show the breadth of the standards. The first standard there is clearly one that would be used by a pharmaceutical company. The subsequent ones are ones that would be more downstream when you're evaluating your product for potential types of toxicity. So it's working its way through the product development stream. And then the last one, of course, is looking at human platelets. This sort of refers back to the discussion we had on ILS. This type of work item would require an ILS, but it's unlikely that we're going to be able to get human platelets and distribute them to various laboratories from the same donor. So this may be a case where we have to substitute an intra-laboratory precision and bias statement versus an ILS study.
Thank you, Dale. And then this last section is really just about participation and membership within ASTM. So when you look at that list of work items there, those all started the process either by a member inside of the Committee E56 identifying the need for a new standard, or also there'll be outside representatives who will approach ASTM saying they've identified a need for a new standard. And so ASTM essentially brings the stakeholders together through the committee structure. And then ASTM provides the form and the process. So the process being the regulations, the ASTM regulations, which outline the regulations and rules for the consensus process. And then the forum is bringing together these subcommittees and committees to draft the document and to provide feedback through the balloting process. So the steps in the ASTM process, this is just a visual slide that helps me, is just, someone contacts ASTM and determines a need. We need stakeholder commitment, right? So it's just if one person needs a standard so that their product can get to market, that wouldn't really fit the bill of an ASTM standard. We want stakeholder commitment from the different groups, producers, users, general interest. Once it's been determined that it is an actual need and the committee supports it, that individual who's going to lead the effort would register a work item, and that takes approval of a subcommittee chair. So Dale would approve that effort within his subcommittee, or a vote can be made at a subcommittee meeting. Then the task group's formed. Essentially, people contact the technical contact or the task group leader to let them know they're interested. We can send out a press release to ask for participation if we're looking to cast a wider net on task group members to join. And then that task group would work together to form and develop a draft. That draft would have to go first under the subcommittee ballot for 30 days. The task group would review all the negatives received, make any changes to the document that they agreed with as a task group, and then that would go back out to a main or concurrent ballot for another 30 days. Then once the committee addressed the negatives on that main committee ballot, they might do that by agreeing with the negatives and putting it back out on a concurrent ballot. Or if they do not agree with the negatives as are written, they have a process called, essentially adjudicating the negative as not persuasive, excuse me. And that's a whole separate process that essentially says, as a task group, as a subcommittee, we do not agree with these technical points, and will rule the negative not persuasive. And then once that's approved, the item would move forward on to approval and publication. So once it gets to the approval level, then it essentially moves over to our ASTM editorial staff, who works to publish that document within 6 weeks of approval. As I noted a little bit earlier, task group membership is available to anyone interested, and everyone's welcome to participate. ASTM membership is not required. We say it's preferred because once that item gets onto the subcommittee ballot, at that point, only ASTM members can vote on or comment on the draft. Up until that point, anyone can participate, but once it gets to the subcommittee level, those are ASTM members only. Task groups could either be proposing a new standard, revising an existing standard, preparing a recommendation for subcommittee, or to Dale's point, there could be a task group formed to work on an ILS for an existing ASTM standard. To take that next step after the task group level to join the committee and be part of the subcommittee and main committee, ASTM membership is a $75 annual membership fee. It includes a free volume of your choice. That essentially means a volume is a collection of ASTM standards. E56 standards are housed in one of the volumes of ASTM, one of the volumes, the list of volumes. So essentially, that would ensure that you have all the E56 standards for free. Once you're a member of ASTM, you can actually join as many subcommittees and task groups that you're interested in. You can join other main committees on sustainability or whatever your other interests are. Of course, every committee you join is more emails and communication, but even when you join ASTM and join additional subcommittees or committees, there's no requirement to, requirements to participate specifically. So you could join other committees and just kind of, see what's going on within them and participate when standards come up that you have an interest in. For example, some of the F4 work on medical devices overlaps with F42 on additive manufacturing. So some of our members will join F42 on additive manufacturing just to see sort of what's being worked on and then step up and lend a voice when it relates specifically to medical devices. Returning ballots, that's open to any member of the process. So essentially we encourage you to return ballots since that's your voice in the process. And then we always have the meeting information posted on the ASTM website. Again, for the meetings, for the subcommittee meetings and the main committee meeting, those are not restricted. Those meetings are not restricted to ASTM members. So anyone who's interested to participate can, and that's both at the face-to-face meeting on site, we'll be in New Orleans in the fall, or to join virtually through the WebEx link. So that's available to anyone. So even if you are a member and are participating, you're welcome to forward that link on or share it with other colleagues of yours who are interested.
Kate, could I just jump in for a second?
Yeah.
I think one other thing about membership is in order to keep the membership invested in what we're doing, members are required to vote on ballots. And if a member doesn't vote on 3 subsequent ballots, then they'll be contacted by either the executive committee or a subcommittee chair and ask if they want to remain a member. So that keeps a lot of the people that just join and then sort of lose interest and don't participate. That helps keep that to a minimum.
So
I
Dale,
think what I said, I think that's what I said there is correct administratively, is it not? Okay.
so they're not actually removed as a member. We have no means to remove members of the
Okay.
committee since anyone's welcome to participate. But ASTM members and committee members have either hold an official vote or they hold a non-official vote. So whether you hold an official vote or a non-official vote, if you're a member of the committee and you vote negative, it stops the process, regardless of whether or not you hold the official vote. And the committee has to address that negative before they can move on to approval. However, there's also requirements for the committee on percent return. So we need 60% of the official voting members to return their ballots in order for the ballot to be valid. And we need a certain percentage affirmative votes, 90% at the main committee level, 67% at the subcommittee level, for that item to move forward. And before they can, members can even address the negatives, we need to have that 90% affirmative rate. And so those percentages are calculated using the official voters. And so Dale noted that if an official voter misses 3 or more ballots, they don't return them, they don't even abstain on them. Then we reach out and say essentially, hey, are you still interested in holding this official vote and being counted towards these percentages? And if not, or if they don't respond, then we'll remove that official vote. They'll still get all the notices for the ballots. They can still vote on all the ballots. They can still stop an item from moving forward by voting negative. But it doesn't lower those numbers. Sometimes we'll get ballots that only have 59% return, and we have to extend the ballot for another week and send reminders. And that's just to ensure that those members that are holding the official votes are really, doing their due diligence to at least open the ballot and abstain on it, and kind of pay attention to what's going on with the committee. But if you were interested in just, following along the sidelines, essentially, for a committee, you could certainly be a non-official voting member for as long as you'd like, and it wouldn't change. And so just some keys to participation. It's a bit overwhelming, I think, for new members to join an ASTM committee because there's so much different work going on, a lot of technical language around consensus and standards development. But really the first thing to do is to get in, log into the site and review the standards activity of the committee. And then, as we're talking about here, just to vote on all the ballots, even if that means going in and abstaining because you don't have an interest on those items, that still counts as a vote. And then if you do feel strongly, or even if you have a technical consideration for any of the items, we encourage you to vote negative. Negative is the only thing that stops the item from moving forward. So if you were to vote affirmative with a comment and then included technical changes that the committee agreed with, essentially they wouldn't be able to stop that standard from moving forward. So it's just my way of saying that negative votes are not essentially bad. They're not viewed in any kind of negative connotation by the committee. They're actually helpful and can be withdrawn by the negative voter at any time. So you could talk to the technical contact and change your vote at any time. Attending the meetings is wonderful, and we certainly make it as open as possible by adding those WebEx links and creating hybrid meetings. And then to contribute to the standards development process in any way, through a task group, through voting on the ballots, through, an occasional comment on the ballots, is certainly welcomed by the committee. If you were to join and vote, this is just an outline of what that means. So if you vote negative, it means you have technical suggestions or recommendations that identify specific concerns, and effective negative votes have language or suggestions of, alternate language to put in the standard. That's always really helpful for the group. An affirmative with comment means you agree with the item, but maybe you have editorial suggestions or some editorial notes you've noticed as you went through that maybe aren't correct. And and that way the item will still move forward, but you can suggest editorial changes, or maybe you say you have an idea of something they should consider in the next revision or in the future. You could vote affirmative with comment, and they could take it up as new business in the next meeting. And then abstain with comment. You know, maybe you just don't have an expertise in that area, or you have comments that are maybe not related to the item itself. So that's the end of our presentation. I have my contact information in here in case you have any questions about ASTM, standards development, access to standards, or Committee E56 specifically. And thank you so much for joining us today and learning more about Committee E56 and the work that they do.
Thank you very much, Kate. So we have time for questions or comments. I would like to invite everyone in this virtual auditorium to please either post your question in the chat box or simply unmute yourself and ask the question.
Hi, Kate, Dale, that was a really interesting presentation. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about how the need for a standard is determined.
Yep, of course. So, so essentially, you know, oftentimes it will come up within committee discussion. So, when Dale's subcommittee meets, different members will talk about areas where they find they have a need. Sometimes the FDA reviewers, for example, will notice if there's some specific characteristic of a nanomaterial that that people are using different test methods or their own test methods to validate, and it's not consistent across all the applications. So they may say, you know, there's a need for a test method in this area to help us, you know, to help our reviewers be using the same standard, or have these applicants use the same standard each time, so we're looking at the same result. Sometimes it will be, you know, someone coming from the outside to say they have a material, or they have, you know, some new information that essentially would require a modification to an existing ASTM standard to include this new information or this new material. Or they could have a completely, you know, new process that they would like to bring to the committee. But essentially it comes from inside or out. And then the subcommittee is really the group that's meeting. The subcommittee is really the group that determines whether or not that need's needed. Often they'll reach out to other colleagues that might not be in the subcommittee meeting to get additional feedback and see if other people are feeling the same thing. But essentially we want to make sure that there's a group of industry, you know, representatives, or not industry, but a group of representatives who are interested in pursuing that item, and not just one person, you know, that would benefit from the standards development. Dale, do you have anything to add to that?
No, I think that's a good description. But I think that sometimes is also one of the hardest to get over. That inertia sometimes can be difficult, because that's sometimes hard to assess. But I think the process you outlined is how we do it.
I have a related question. How do you, so in a situation that you just described, you know, the FDA is, as you put it, describing a need, or, you know, maybe they're actually, you know, requiring, you know, compliance with a given standard that needs to be generated. How do you get people to comply when, you know, either the FDA is not involved, or, you know, there's clearly a situation where you need a standard, but there's no sort of, you know, mandate. There's no regulatory body that is strongly suggesting or insisting.
Yeah, that's a great question. So the ASTM, you know, standards development process essentially ends with publication of the standard. And so, you know, we often say to customers or users that have questions, that we don't police the use of the standard or the requirement of it. It's essentially up to, like you said, either a regulation. The FDA could add it to their list of, recommended standards, or it's referenced in a contract. So someone saying, if I'm going to purchase this product from you, it needs to meet this ASTM standard. And those are essentially the ways that it becomes mandatory, right? Other than that, it's really up to the industry to reference and use the standard in a way to make it, commonplace, essentially. And so that's one of the reasons we look to have that stakeholder engagement, because certainly we could develop a standard and get it through the consensus process within the committee, and then it might not get picked up or used by industry. It would be a published and approved standard, but you really need that support. And that's certainly something that I think is a struggle, to say there's a certain group of people who feel that this standard is necessary and would be beneficial, but then to get the producers to follow through and use that standard is another step, certainly.
Yeah, and I can add to that too, because I work in a non-regulatory environment, which I think is sort of what you're referring to. And all you can do is try to highlight the value that standard brings to that particular laboratory or that person. And if they choose to implement it, that's great, but it ultimately it is their choice. I've chosen to implement some ASTM standards in my laboratory because I think they bring value to the work the lab does. And through conversations with colleagues who weren't familiar with ASTM, they see that value, and then over time, some of them have adopted, for example, the DLS standard that I referred to, because my lab started using it. It solved some problems we were having with reproducibility. So when other colleagues are having the same issue, I'd say, well, yeah, I had that problem, and here's how I resolved it. But that can't be forced in a non-regulatory environment. So it's more value has to sell it, not being forced to use it.
Any other questions or comments? Okay, I will take it as no. One more time, I would like to thank Kate and Dale for joining us. Thank you for sharing your expertise with our team. And thank you to Kelly and Dr. Friedman for organizing these seminars. Thank you everyone who participated in today's seminars and for your questions and great comments and great discussion. Before we close this seminar, Kelly asked me to make an announcement that the seminar today is the last one in the fall 2021, spring 2022 series. We'll take a break for summer and we will resume this series later in the fall of this year. So with this, again, thank you very much to our speakers. Thank you, everyone. Enjoy your summer.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Marina. Thank you, Kelly.
Yeah, thank you for the invitation, Marina.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.